Today I would like to offer all of you in the audience an invitation to change. I believe that if we want to be worthy of our dreams, we have to learn to talk to one another differently. But if we can embrace invitation rather than persuasion, we can transform our world. Our world is dominated by persuasion, and in some ways this isn't all that new. As a faculty member in communication, I know that way back in 350 BCE, Aristotle spent a great deal of time and effort trying to teach influential people how they could best persuade others to their point of view. However, in our modern world, the number of persuasive messages we're inundated with every day has grown exponentially, and we seem not to like it very much. For example, the average American is now exposed to somewhere between 400 and 600 persuasive ads every single day. That's 40 to 50 million by the time you're 60 years old. Advertising scholars know that we couldn't possibly absorb, process, or judge so many messages a day. And in fact, the research shows that as a defense mechanism, we tend to go out of our way to avoid them. On social media. Our social media technologies have allowed us to increasingly broadcast our political, social, and other views directly and constantly to our friends. As a result, people increasingly admit being willing to hide, block, or unfriend people because of their persuasive positions. In fact, the Pew Internet Research Poll finds that 18% of us admit to hiding, blocking, or unfriending someone on Facebook, specifically because of political rants. Finally, and speaking of politics, our Republicans and Democrats are increasingly focused on persuading others to their points of view rather than conversation or meeting in the middle. In fact, our 112th Congress was the least compromising Congress in American history. As a result, the Gallup poll finds that 8 in 10 of us disapprove of our Congress's performance. And the number one reason why we offer is that gridlock caused by the inability to conversate or compromise. So, while our world is dominated by persuasion, we seem to wish it weren't. Why? There are 2 different ways we can go around persuading other people. The first is by misleading them. To do so, we can offer only part of the story or only the facts that support our case. We could certainly show glitzy ads that don't have a lot of substance, or we can peer pressure other people into believing or supporting our point of view. However, I believe that all of these tactics are unethical and are at the very least unsustainable, because inevitably people learn the other side of the story. And when they do, it shouldn't surprise you to realize the research says they don't tend to like the people they think lied to them. The other method of persuasion, then, is the more classical one, that we can provide reasoned arguments, logic, and sound advice for what we want to do. However, even this method of persuasion is problematic because it rests on 2 fundamental assumptions. 1, that I as a speaker actually have the objective truth, and 2, as a speaker, I know more about your, as the audience's truth, than you do. These, of course, are absurd. No one has the total objective truth in our world. Inevitably, we as people are shaped by who we are and what we've experienced. And for me to believe that I know more about what you've experienced than you do is conceited at best. As a result, even in this traditional sender-to-receiver model of persuasion, the only way for me to be truly effective is to ask you where you've actually come from. As a result, today I would like to ask that we embrace a really crazy notion, and that's that we actually just let go of persuasion as our goal. I believe that if we can do that, if we can focus on invitation rather than persuasion, we can meaningfully transform our world. So I'd like you to think for a moment about how you feel when you get an invitation in the mail. Research says we tend to feel welcome, wanted. We get excited when we open the envelope, even when you don't want to go. And sometimes I don't. The research shows it's nice to be included. But even more than that, an invitation implies an obligation. People expect you to RSVP. This means that when you send someone an invitation, you invite them to engage with you in a way that would never happen if you simply mandated they come. As a result, if we can approach our conversations with invitation rather than persuasion, we can actually meaningfully connect with the people in our world. So, I'd like to encourage you to stop saying a few things. Traditional persuasive messages are based on particular authoritative phrases. Things like, you must, this is, you should, and you ought. When you find yourself beginning sentences that way, you are conveying to others, again, that you have the answer and they don't. This means that I as a speaker know what's best, you as a listener doesn't, and you should do what I say. This is flawed and tends to promote the kind of invitational situations where people don't respond, they shut down and they avoid. On the other hand, if we can truly participate with one another in an invitational way, this means inviting others to dialogue rather than persuading them, we can make a difference. These types of invitational openings begin a very different way. They begin with phrases like, how might we? Why should we? How did we? Or why did you? When we begin conversations those ways, we open ourselves up to sharing our perspectives, but we also welcome the perspectives of others in response. Now, this is not some sort of pie in the sky, head in the clouds utopia. Research shows this stuff actually makes a difference. So, for example, research into inbound marketing has found that when marketers invite a dialogue with their customers, via social media, for example, and then, and this is key, actually listen to the response, they are much more likely to attract and retain customers than those advertisers that engage in the traditional push-based persuasive advertisements. Another example, when I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, there were a consortium of hospitals that were interested in switching to electronic medical records for their patients. But rather than just making the switch and then persuading/insisting that that was the correct path, they actually invited people from across the county to come to dinner and to talk about the idea. Through those dialogues where they actually opened themselves up to feedback and concern, they learned a great deal more about what needed to happen in order to make a successful transition. And when they did eventually transition to electronic medical records a year later, they had much more community buy-in. But let's be clear, invitational rhetoric isn't just a sneaky way of getting at persuasion. If it's done correctly, the speaker truly has to be open to changing his or her opinions based on the feedback from the audience. This means that the truly crazy notion is we have to let go of the idea that we're always right and take a chance that we could actually learn from someone else. So at the beginning of this afternoon, we watched the TEDx video that said the purpose and mission of TEDx is to create local conversations about ideas worth sharing. I challenge you today to actually take them seriously. In other words, don't just sit here and listen and then go home. When we're done, talk about what you heard today with one another. Provide feedback to those of us who spoke and the organizers, whether it's in person or via social media. Continue to have conversations about what works and what doesn't work for you. And next year, or in the future, when Weber State hosts another TEDx, think about speaking yourself. Because it's through those dialogues and conversations with one another that ideas are tested and refined and become meaningful, rather than through persuasive claims. So in the end, I ask you to imagine what it would look like if we began all of our conversations on Facebook and in Congress with phrases like, how could we, rather than you must. I sincerely believe that if we adopted invitational rhetoric, we create a possible opening for conversation, for learning, and for action that would really make us worthy of our dreams.